Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing another episode of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real-life fossil counterparts. And today we're finishing off that aerial pack that Furlong has made, but we've got a couple cool new additions and a new species that I'm really excited to have a look at. So we're going to be starting off with our pterosaurs today. I'm going to be having a look at Dimorphodon to start off with, everyone's favorite kind of out of the box early Jurassic pterosaur. So look at these cute little guys. So let's see what we can find here. So let's have a look at you. You're kind of the one that's best in the light at the moment. So this is our Dimorphodon, which means two teeth, because it's got two different types of teeth. Really awesome. So we can see a lot of the changes here. The biggest changes is to the head, because the original Jurassic Park one pretty much just looked like a... Let's see if we can get a little bit of a better look. A little bit of a better look at a head. Here we are. Looks very much like the just a T-Rex, almost, just put on Dimorphodon. But Dimorphodon actually has quite a different skull. It's often been referred to as a puffin and looked like a puffin. And this actually led to people reconstructing them a lot with like puffin colorations, and also believing that these guys were fish eaters because of also the marine formations they lived in. But more recent evidence suggests that these guys were much more better adapted to running and walking around. So these guys would have been good walkers, and they would have been pretty good on land, and believed to be able to hunt things such as small invertebrates and small vertebrates, so like small frogs, small invertebrates, pretty much whatever they get their mouths around. So these guys were much more similar. Instead of like a puffin, these guys probably would have been much more like potentially like a bird of prey, or maybe even like a bat. So like lesser short-tailed bats is a good example, because these are bats that are often on the ground a lot, so that could be potentially a more similar ecology. But as I mentioned, these guys are quite early in the evolutionary tree. These guys are from the early Jurassic and one of the earliest known pterosaurs. So that kind of helps with their biology a bit. Just to see that these guys aren't too big. They're about 5 feet or just under a 5 foot wingspan. So quite a short wingspan that's adapted for living in forests as well. So you can see it's quite long here. Probably it'll be a little bit more rounded. These guys also had those long tails with the smaller kind of like a crest at the end there. So these were lost in the later pterosaurs like Pterodactylus, and eventually like Pteranodon and Quetzalcoatlus. But a lot of these earlier ones, especially like the Rhamphorhynchoids, they had this long tail here. But you can see these guys are quite cool. You see the changes to the wing there. Though I would extend the membrane out a little bit. And another thing as well is the membrane there would have been there's the Proboscidean, I think it's called Eurobotanium, I believe you say that. Well, not Unobtainium, that's Avatar, but this is Eugobotanium. So this is kind of a skin flap that would exist on the feet there, and there was a bone that kind of sticked out, and they would have had that there. So would have made a little bit different. And also with most pterosaurs, it's missing the pycnofibers, and they would have looked a lot less like this weird crocodile pterosaur, but would have been a lot more fluffy and feathery. And I know some people don't like that, but I prefer to see that more accurate look to them. But yeah, really nice. Big fan. So Furlong did a wonderful job of that. So we'll let them fly off and do their thing. And then we're going to be moving on. Next up, we've got a big one coming. We've got Tropiegnathus. Then we've got a much bigger pterosaur here. Let's see if we can find one that's not being weird. And there's the other one. Where's the other one? Out here. Are you good in the light? No, you're kind of a bit weird. We'll substitute with you. But here we can see here, this is the Tropiegnathus. So Tropiegnathus is quite an interesting one. It's scientific name is Tropiegnathus mesbrinalis from the Ronaldo Formation of Romaldo, I believe you say that, from Brazil. And the original specimen was almost entirely complete, though there is another larger specimen that was found in 2013. The first specimen had a skull that was about 2 feet long, but the second specimen, which was a little bit more complete as well, had a skull that was about 1 meter long, and that allowed, and along with some other body parts like some of the arm and things like that, showed that this guy actually got to about 8 meters in wingspan. So it was one of the largest pterosaurs, second only pretty much to a lot of those larger starkids like Hapsogopteryx and Quetzalcoatlus and those guys. So that's quite interesting. So a lot of that shows as well that these guys have this large kind of semicircular crests on their beak here. As you can see here, that's about 20 centimeters, I think, long and 10 centimeters tall on the smaller specimen, and also the smaller ones about 13 centimeters as well. And it's actually believed that these would have been able to help stabilize the crest if they're diving and looking for stuff in the water, since their ecology was very likely similar to things like albatrosses, eating on small fish, squids, other small animals that they could fly down and catch, or potentially sit on the water and catch, similar to how albatrosses hunt today. Because a lot of people have this thing about skim winging, so there's only one animal that can do that today, and they kind of just have special adaptations for it. Most birds, they kind of sit on the water when they're feeding, so that's very likely would have been like this for these guys, but they would have been flying around, obviously, of course, doing their thing. So these guys lived, as I mentioned, about 110 million years ago, around the formation of the Atlantic Sea, where as Africa was separating from South America. These guys would have been aerial fishers. These guys were hunting in lake and marine waters. And it was originally described by Wellfolder by quite similar to Ornithocheirus. So that big, if you guys have seen Walking with Dinosaurs, that really big Ornithocheirus would have been actually Tropiegnathus, which is quite interesting. But more recent research suggests that these guys were more closely related to Coloborhynchus and Epenguara, which is actually not that closely related to Tropiegnathus, though there have been some back and forth with it related to things like Ornithocheirus, things like that. These guys may have been a little bit more derived, and Ornithocheirus would have been a little bit more basal in their lineage. It's kind of like a he said, she said kind of thing, but really, really cool. So we can see that large head and the crest is well represented. I would say some changes would need to be made to the wings. These guys would have had wings very similar to those like, of course, albatrosses and other ocean-faring pterosaurs, so very long wings that allow them to soar, and they wouldn't have had such tight edges. They would have been very rounded edges, so kind of from that ankle there and kind of, or even the knee, and just kind of come up like this, and then be rounded at the tip there, and a little bit more rounded there, so very much a long wing. Albatrosses are a great example, and also the membrane there would probably be a little bit more like that as well. You can see that large head going on there. So yeah, really, really interesting, and the kind of second largest pterosaur in the game now. First, obviously, being Quetz, but we'll let him fly off and do his thing. Really, really cool. Next up, we've got everyone's favorite DLC one, made famous, of course, by Prehistoric Planet. We have got Barbaradactylus. So let's have a look and see if we can find one that's in the light. Now we'll let them fly out a little bit more. I really want to get one that's like got a flat wing, because these guys really have some changes to the wing that look really nice. So let's just let them fly around a little more. Let's see. Here we are. Here is one. Perfect guy. So you can see one of the first changes here is that really weird kind of hook on the beak is gone, and its anatomy fits so much better with most other Nyctosaurids. You can also see here, there's two versions of this actually. There's a sailed version, so that original sail that was in the one from the base game is pretty much there. But this one is a sailless version, so it doesn't have that membrane there, and it's also potentially looks a lot more like most other reconstructions of Nyctosaurids, so relatives like Nyctosaurus. So these guys would have been quite a bit bigger. You can see they're quite big, bulky head and bit bulkier body. You can see those wings look so much better though, much more rounded here. So you can see very similar ecology to those larger. There's actually believed to be a little bit of convergent evolution between Barbaradactylus and pterodactylids. So Nyctosaurids would have been a little bit different. And one thing as well is, it's another thing they got wrong, is that these guys would have had no fingers. So they would have lost their fingers independently. So those two little fingies should be gone. But we can see those changes to the membrane there. Should it probably extend a little bit, but I think the changes to the wing are actually perfect. So these guys were described in 2018, and they come from Morocco, and actually lived right at the end of the Cretaceous, about 1,000,000 years or so before the extinction of the dinosaurs, so about 68 million years ago. And these guys are known from a single partial skeleton, as well as several isolated, like, humeri. So that's the big bone at the top of your arm. It's quite humorous, actually. But they're known from a few other partial skeletons, things like that. We don't really know what the crest looks like because that wasn't preserved, so this is based off Nyctosaurus. These guys have a wingspan of about 5 meters, or about 16 feet, and these guys seem to be a little bit more related to Brazilian kind of members of their group. There's actually another large species of Nyctosaur that lived in Brazil at the same time that could be a relative of Barbaradactylus. But these guys are also found to be within the lineage of Nyctosaurids that actually lost their fingers, and they on their hands. They would have just had their arm and then that one big pinky finger that the membrane of the wing hangs out on. And these guys, as I mentioned, they're also found exclusively in rocks from marine environments from the late Cretaceous, and they're close relatives, the pteranodontids, and thought to be aerial fishes. These guys would have been plucking fish or squid from the near surface, or diving in the ocean, similar to gannets. And these guys actually live with a few other species, like Alacone, and also the pterodontid Draco. If you guys have seen Prehistoric Planet, that's kind of all the species that it kind of lived with, which is quite interesting. And the seas were warm, and they actually would have also probably come into land to breed. So if you guys love Prehistoric Planet, I know I've got to keep mentioning it. It's my favorite documentary series. I even like it more than Walking with Dinosaurs. So yeah, I think if you want to see more Barbaradactylus and a lot of speculative ecology that goes with that, that's a good program to watch. But you can see we've got a more accurate one here done by Furlong, who really did a wonderful job. And obviously you mentioned the fingers, the picking the fibers, things like that. But yeah, other than that, I think it's pretty spot on. Maybe some changes to the wing and the kind of patagium. But yeah, it looks nice regardless, so we'll let them flow up and do their thing. So next up, we have got, second to last, we have got a close relative of Pteranodon. We have got Geosternbergia. So this wonderful Geosternbergia, oh, it kind of stopped there for some reason. Let's see if you can find one in the... Oh, we'll have a look at you since you look like you're in the light. We'll let you fly up a little bit. How about you? How about we stick with you, because you've got the prettiest colours. Maybe we can use Geosternbergia. Here we are. So this is Geosternbergia. I know you guys are probably going to get annoyed about hearing that name. But Geosternbergia, Sternbergi, these guys are known from lots of partial skeletons from the late Cretaceous of Kansas. And they were first named as a second species of Pteranodon, known as Pteranodon sternbergi. They were given their own genus name in like the late 70s, named after paleontologist George F. Sternberg, who discovered these guys in the 50s. And these guys are also one of the largest known pterosaurs. They would have been in this a little bit bigger than Pteranodon itself. These guys had probably been about 7 meter wingspan, or about 24 feet, and their skull would have been about 1 meter long, putting it in the same size range as those large Tropiegnathus, and those a bit smaller than those Extarchids, so pretty interesting. And they were completely toothless, as you can see, and had these like strong upcurved jaws, which is believed to be able to pretty much help catch fish and things like that. They also have a short neck and a muscular torso that would, with obviously, and they have long and narrow wings, as you kind of see here. I would probably make them a little bit more round, like the Tropiegnathus, or the Barbaradactylus, probably a better example because that one's a little bit nicer. But these guys would have had wings very similar to modern albatrosses to be able to soar across the oceans. And they also have several specimens that have smaller adults with small crests. So it's very possible that there is some interpretation that these ones with smaller crests were females, and the males, which is obviously depicted here because it's the biggest and most impressive, would have been males. So the males would have been the one with the big crests, and the females a little bit smaller and dainty. Uh, and at the time it was alive, it lived during Lake Cretaceous about 86 million years ago. They would have lived around the Western Interior Seaway, which covered most of North America at the time, feeding on fish, squids, ammonites, belemnites, things like that, and is really only known from those areas. And likely soared over the water and plucked water from around near the surface, or even dove down, sat in the water, and even dived in to try and grab prey, which is quite interesting. And as I mentioned, these guys are a close relative of Pteranodon, and they're found in those rocks. They often are still considered a species of Pteranodon, and may have actually been a direct ancestor of Pteranodon, but we kind of don't know. And but yeah, still a really, really interesting animal. So I hope you not love Geosternbergia, and really like the skin as well. I think it's come out nice. You can see those major changes to the skull and the upturned jaw, and that really large crest. As I mentioned, pycnofibers, but I think there could be some changes. Let's see if we can find the other one here. I think there could be some changes to the wing. So this one's got his wing out. This is a little bit nicer, but a really long wing would have been for these guys, and potentially go up to their ankles as well. So something a little bit more round and things like that. But other than that, pretty cool. I'm a big fan. So let them fly off and do their thing before we look at the Pteranodon. So here we've got we've got two Pteranodons actually. One's the Jurassic Park one is based on a subadult, so we'll have a look at that. But we're going to be starting off with our first Pteranodon, the most iconic of all the pterosaurs. So you can see this wonderful guy here. Let's see if we can find one. There we are. That's a good look. So, that's better. But here we are. We can see the Pteranodon. So this is obviously based on the Jurassic World one, which is quite ugly in my opinion with all the scales and things like that. But these guys are one of the most iconic pterosaurs in the world, if not the most iconic. They have a large wingspan of close to 7 meters, making it as large. It was potentially one of the largest at the time when it was discovered. It was thought to be the largest flying animal, but obviously beat by Quetzalcoatlus and Tropiegnathus now. These guys were pretty common, and there's a few species described. It was first described by Marsh in 1876, and is commonly found in I can't even speak. Found on the Perdish Shale in South Dakota. Lived across the Western Interior Seaway, things like that. And even recently, they've been split into like Geosternbergia and then split into Dawn Draco. But obviously, that's kind of something a lot of people are still controversial. And these guys are often shown wrong in a lot of movies and things like that. Its name means toothless wing, and people still give it teeth, especially in Jurassic Park it was given teeth. But you can see it's got this large kind of turned jaw, and it would have been able to pick up things with its feet like an eagle or something. It's very much adapted, very similar to albatross as a large open sea animal, living like an albatross, feeding on small fish and squids and things like that. So they would have had this quite round wings there, as you kind of see here. I would probably still round them out quite a bit more, but you can see some of the changes. This is probably based more on a male, because the one from the movies are meant to be females. So this is based off the male. You can see a much taller crest and things like that. I could argue you could probably make it even bigger. But these guys, as you can see, they've got these large upturned jaws, very similar to Geosternbergia, that would have been used for catching fish, things like that. And we have a lot of specimens of these guys, so we know there was some variation between males and females, as I mentioned. So this one is most definitely a male because that large crest. Females had so much smaller crests. But and also were half the size of the females, half the size of males the females were. Can't even speak properly. And what we know from their ecology as well, these guys would have been born pretty much like precocial, so that means they were born pretty much ready to go out the egg, so they're out to go and fly, which is quite cool. And these guys were going to be more there's actually been a lot of research into these guys as well, suggesting these guys were quite good divers. So they would have been able to dive into the water and then launch off water as well, especially Mark Whitten has been doing a lot of research into that, which is quite interesting. But you can see here some of the changes here. To the face is probably the most obvious. I don't really like that sunken like eye thing. It's still very Jurassic Park. It's just kind of given slightly better anatomy, but you could obviously fix the wings up. The crest looks nice. Give it pectina fibers. Give it a bit of fat on it, and I think it looks so much better. But we'll have a look at at the Jurassic Park Pteranodon. I'd say this one looks so much better than the Jurassic Park one. It's a little bit smaller for some reason, so that's why it was kind of changed into this sub-adult. So it's got a little bit of a smaller crest, but you can see it's also got this downturned kind of snout there that kind of goes up. So, and then it's a little bit more beef on its bones. You can see the larger eyes, no over the top like sunken eyes, things like that. That usually is a sign of like malnutrition. So, all the Pteranodons in Jurassic Park and Jurassic World are malnourished. You can see the little bit more rounder wings. Looks a little bit nicer. You could actually make it a little bit thinner as well. Looks quite nice. Big fan. As I mentioned, pectina fibers is probably something you could add on. But yeah, you can see all those changes that really makes it look much nicer. And it has no teeth. Because in the original Jurassic Park model, it had teeth, but now it doesn't. But really cool. I'm definitely a little bit more fan of the Jurassic Park art style. It doesn't look like a really sick and inebriated Pteranodon like these guys. So hopefully some cool edits would make it look nice and all that. So yeah, really big fan. I think it's come out rather well. So all these pterosaurs were done by Furlong. Really did a wonderful job at them all. And there might be some feathered ones coming in the future. I've seen some leaks and things like that. It's going to be quite interesting. Leaks from mod packs, of course, not from the game. But we're going to be moving on anyway. We're going to have a look at another one by Pickle. We have got Camarasaurus. Got these wonderful big guys here. I love these guys so much. So this is what Pickle has done. You can see some of the major changes here, especially around the head and neck. The one from the original game has a really thin neck for some reason. And we also see some changes to the head. We can see also there's some changes to the nostrils here, much more down the snout. Potentially would have been even down here, but still looks nice. There's also evidence that these guys would have had like a semi-keratinous, like almost beak, like a pseudo beak. So like hardened keratin around the mouth, which is quite interesting. You can see some changes to the head there. Much more fleshy with these big lips. And I like the changes to the teeth as well. There would have been lots of flesh around here. Potentially even for display purposes, it seems some speculative art of its relatives like Brachiosaurus, with these like inflatable balloons in their face, which I think is quite cool. Some also nice changes, like the eyes not quite so sunken in, it's not exposed fenestrae. But yeah, I really love these guys. I really love the skull. It's got a really nice skull. I just like it. And you can also see that neck is also greatly bulked up. You can see, because a lot of sauropod necks are way too skinny. There would have been a lot of muscles and ligaments to hold it up high like this, as you can see. But you can see how much nicer that looks. Much more healthy looking and muscular, and it goes all the way down. Really pretty. I'm definitely a big fan. And you can see some changes to the legs here, and we might choose you because you're a little bit better at exposing. We can see a little bit more changes. You see they've got quite deep barrel chest, and then they've got these long columnar legs. So they would have had legs that were pretty much straight to be able to better withstand the weight of their bodies, because these guys are quite big, like 20 meters long and potentially like up to 10 to 15, maybe even 20 tons. So quite big animals. And these guys would have had long legs like this. They would have been like sloping back, very similar to Brachiosaurus, just not quite as extreme. But you can see the changes to the feet here. They would have been walking like a fleshy horseshoe, it's often compared as, that I've compared many times in these videos. You can see the original footprint here with the toes. These guys wouldn't have had these toes exposed. They'd be like a fleshy horseshoe. And they also would have had this large dew claw that could potentially use for sparring or digging and things like that. A lot of later titanosaurs would have lost these and began walking on their knuckles, which is quite interesting. But these guys are a lot more basal. As I mentioned, these guys are from the Jurassic, so a little bit earlier in evolution. So they had those kind of dew claws, which is quite cool. But also we can see some changes to that chest there, big round chest, and we can see the back feet as well. These guys, the fourth and fifth digits, obviously don't have those nails, and you can see they've got very elephant-like feet at the back, almost tortoise-like is probably even a better comparison, with these three large claws that turn to the other way, so that would have been very useful for digging things like that, digging nests and things like that. A good comparison is tortoises. That's often a common comparison, which is quite interesting, even though they're not that closely related. It shows that a lot of convergent evolution there. And then you can see that big chest and round bodies. You see there all the neck and all that, just give it such a nice profile. And then you can see this extended tail, made a little bit longer. These guys would have had the pubic boot coming down here, big round bellies for digesting all the plants, and you can see the tails extended a little bit, especially around the end here. Often in Jurassic Park the tails are way too short, but you can see they're made a bit taller there, and then you can see it extends all the way down, and it looks really, really nice. A lot of these are not too huge changes. The neck's probably the most obvious one, and the feet are the obvious ones, and the head. But other than that, it's just perfect. And this is pretty much what you'd imagine Camarasaurus would look like. Really, really awesome. I'm definitely a big fan. Such a cutie. So let them run off and do their thing. So that's another pickle edit done. Let you walk off. You're going to do your social. Looks like, yeah. Oh no, you're just walking off. Good. So next up, we have got, by furlong, we've got another Dilophosaurus edit that we're going to take a look at. So let's release. You can see this one's also got some pretty mean edits to it. You can see this one's the Jurassic World Dominion one, but this is the Jurassic Park one. I'll have a look at you, since you're probably the easiest one because you're in the sandy area. But you can see some of the changes here. And as I've mentioned in the last video, because we also had Pickle did a edit of the Dilophosaurus, but in 2020 there was a big redescription of Dilophosaurus, and it changed a lot. Its body was made much thicker, and we can see a lot of the changes of the face as well. You can see those large hook in the mouth there for catching prey, with these kind of smaller teeth at the front and the large on the side here. Also, the crest was also changed quite a bit. It didn't have that kind of weird little spike thing. And it also shows it was very hollow, almost like a cask. So there would have been a lot of keratin around it. And a lot of people have used that to create all sorts of different cool colors and shapes to the crest there, which I think is always really, really cool. And then you can see they've also got a really long neck. These guys are a little bit more basal in the family tree. They're an early tetraneuron. And would have been the start of those kind of three claws. Things like that, related to Cryolophosaurus and animals like that. But you can see that long neck. These guys did have quite a long neck. Quite a long body as well, you can kind of see here. So long body, long neck with quite spindly legs in comparison. These guys were still apex predators in the ecosystem. They would have been living in the early Jurassic, so feeding on all sorts of cool animals that lived in the environment, and potentially quite yummy as well, like Scelidosaurus or relatives of animal like that. From that time. And then you can see also that tail is also probably still a little bit short, but obviously it's got to still fit on the rig. And the two biggest things, we can see the frill dragon frill has also been removed, and these guys are still venomous technically, so, and that's also wrong, but these guys, as will show up, oh, not transport will go, these guys are also way too small. Dilophosaurus was actually quite a big animal. It was believed because the raptor was big, they wanted to reduce confusion in people when talking about and use the Dilophosaurus in the first movie. So they basically shrunk it. Though these guys would have been quite big, the newest estimates even make them even bigger. So a Dilophosaurus would have been about 6 to 7 meters long, so quite a big animal. Especially at the time it lived in, it was still very big. And still really cool animals, but I do love these guys. I'd really love to see like a hyper paleoedit to really change the size as well, so we can get a big 7 meter long Dilophosaurus instead of these little guys. Yeah, really big fan. Nice to see some more edits for Dilophosaurus. Really cool. So we're going to be moving on. So we've got another edit by Pickle here. So we've got the Suchomimus. This is another little Pickle edit. This one's not obviously that big an edit, but these guys are still cool regardless. You can see some wonderful changes to the head. Suchomimus has got a very long snout, and it means crocodile mimic. That's what their name means. And got that really long snout with these large hook in the jaw. Very much adapted for feeding on slippery prey, and also quite similar to a crocodile, so that's where they kind of get that ecology from. I'd look at you since you guys better show it off. Really long jaws, and you can see that little nub there. They got a little crest. Very long, narrow and skinny neck. Very much like a heron compared to their ecology. Especially since there was a recent study that looked at like Spinosaurids and like lots of other animals to try and find out how aquatic they were based on bone thickness. And it seems that Suchomimus may have actually been independently a little bit less aquatically developed, according to that study, than Baryonyx and Spinosaurus. So they would have been probably a little bit more like a heron in their ecology, like sticking their mouth in the water, since they had these large pits in their snout which had lots of nerve endings, very similar to modern crocodilians and other Spinosaurids, where they'd be able to feel pressure changes in the water and catch prey. So that would have been very much likely how it hunted. And then you can also see quite a large chest going on here with these big arms, potentially for helping to grapple prey as well. And then you can see that large kind of vertebrae at the back there that kind of come up like that as well. And you can see that quite a long tail. And I think these guys are just quite cool. Very much a minor edit. You can see some changes. See some of the changes to the feet. I don't think we see any. But these guys are just lots of little edits to make them look a little bit nicer. And I'm definitely a big fan of these guys. Pickle always does a wonderful job with the paleo edits. So let them walk off and do their thing. But next up, we've got a really cool animal I'm excited to talk about. But this is by Master Doot. We have got the terrible hand. We have got Deinocheirus. So this is the terrible hand, or Deinocheirus. Really cool animal. So Deinocheirus is an ornithomimid, so it's related to animals such as like Gallimimus and Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus, though not that directly. These guys were first discovered in 1965 with just a pair of large arms. So it got that name, the horrible hand, from that. And basically for like 60 or so years, we basically had no idea what they looked like until about 2014. And then we found two more complete specimens. And then we found out it was even weirder than we thought. We thought it was just weird. Often before then reconstructed as just a giant like ornithomimid with large claws, but now it's even weirder. So it has this large spoon ball shaped mouth here, and then these large sail, very almost similar to Spinosaurus in that regard. So it's really weird, but still so awesome. These guys would have been quite unusual. They would have been the largest in their clade, so they would have got about 11 meters long, or about 36 feet long, and weighed about 6.5 tons. And though it was quite bulky, they would have had hollow bones, a lot like their other relatives, to help save weight. And their arms were so large, these guys would have had arms that were about 2.4 meters, or 7 feet long. or nearly 8 feet long, with these large 3 claws here. Though they would have been pronated, not like that kind of. Probably would have been better if they put it on like a Pteranodon or something, maybe. Who knows, that might be something in the future they can do. And then put feathers on it. But anyway, they had short legs and quite blunt claws. And they had most very pneumatized vertebrae. And actually, it's believed to, as adding evidence to having feathers, there's believed to be a pycnostyle at the end of the tail. So if you guys don't know what a pycnostyle is on the end of a bird's tail is like fused vertebrae where a lot of the tail feathers are anchored on. So they very likely would have had a tail feather, tail fan at the end of their tail. So there very much could have been evidence for feathers in these guys. And they have quite a long and interesting skull as well, very much like a spoonbill is being compared to, but also considered similar to hadrosaurs as well. And was about a little over a meter long, or about 3.3 feet long, which is quite interesting. And as I mentioned, they're an ornithomimid, so related to like Gallimimus, things like that, and still quite big, and is related to animals like that, though it's considerably more basal. They're in their own group called Deinocheiridae, so related to Gradulomimus and Bichaolong, so not that closely related to Ornithomimidae, which is the animals that include Struthiomimus, Ornithomimus, and Gallimimus. They are in the same group, Ornithomimosauria, but they're not in Ornithomimidae, they're in Deinocheiridae, which is quite interesting. So in terms of its paleoecology, it's believed that these guys would have had these large limbs, potentially some convergent evolutions to Therizinosaurs, so potentially for grabbing and pulling down plants, or potentially for even sifting through aquatic plants and potentially eating fish, since often ornithomimosaurs are considered omnivores. That's very likely something that they could be eating as well. And they also would have been great defense against large animals like Tarbosaurus, which it lived with, though it probably wouldn't have been the main region involved. And it's also believed that these guys had these large neural spines and this possible tail fan from that potential pycnostyle. They could have been feathered and had all sorts of different displays on them, which is quite cool. And also their brain has been scanned, and their brain was actually quite similar to those of birds and troodontids, so these guys would have been quite interesting. They had smaller brains compared to a lot of other theropods, and it would have been more similar to sauropods in that regard. But these guys kind of had a brain that was structured a lot more similar to troodontid and birds, which is quite interesting. And in terms of their diet, the distinct shows these guys had kind of specialized diets, potentially. Their beak is actually quite similar to those of ducks, sort of browsing in water, feeding almost like algae and small vertebrates, things like that. And the skull was probably quite adapted for feeding on those kind of understory and water vegetation, so softer plants. And those have been found gastroliths in their body, and other features suggest that these guys would have been feeding on all sorts of aquatic plants. But there's also features that suggest that was omnivore, so they would have been also found like fish vertebrae and scales, along with the gastroliths found, which are stones in their gizzard that they use to help digest food. So it's very likely these guys were very much omnivores, as I mentioned. And these guys are kind of really weird in that regard, as I mentioned, being those omnivores. And of the various feeding behaviors have been attributed to these guys, so these guys would have potentially been sifting through with their jaws. Let me just pick up this up. Sifting through with their jaws and potentially using their arms to kind of scratch through soil or water to kind of stir up things, or potentially. It's really interesting that they were able to kind of do both. A very interesting ecology, and potentially would have also helped differentiate themselves from other animals in their environment, like Therizinosaurus. Like obviously very similar in a lot of ways. They could have been competing, so it's another niche it can occupy to kind of separate itself and not compete with Therizinosaurus, which is quite interesting. And also helps further prove this kind of more omnivorous like kind of diet and things like that, which is quite cool. And yeah, in terms of their paleo environment, these guys lived in the Namek Formation, which was at the time around the Maastrichtian, so about 70 million years ago. Lots of shallow lakes and things like that, and large river systems, which would have been perfect habitat for these guys, since these guys like water plants and fish, so they would have been perfect for them. These guys are widely distributed as well, and the environment is actually quite comparable to the Okavango Delta of Botswana today. and so would have eaten prey, plants and small animals, and would have been living with other animals such as titanosaurs, various other titanosaurs, also Therizinosaurus and potentially Gigantoraptor. So they would have been able to would have been potentially competing and niche partitioning to try and avoid each other and avoid competing. And the habitats these guys would have lived in, also a few other animals, they would have lived with all sorts of fish and turtles, lots of little mammals and other dinosaurs such as Tarkia, Prenocephalae, Nemectosaurus, and Osteoclidochorda, I believe you say that. And also would have lived with animals such as Tarbosaurus, as mentioned, that would probably been a predator, and lots of other oviraptorids such as Gigantoraptor, things like that. And one thing to mention as well is that it may not have exactly lived with some of these species, because an animal can be separated by time, but it's possible that they could overlap in some regards. So an animal can live in the same formation but not at the same time, so that's another way they couldn't have competed. But another cool thing to mention. So, yeah, I do really like the scalar's interpretation of Deinocheirus, because there is kind of a rule, so to speak. It's not been published yet, but they talk about any dinosaur over 3 tons kind of loses the benefits of having feathers, and then potentially could even lose their feathers. And that includes animals such as Deinocheirus, which is quite large compared to a lot of its other mostly feathered relatives. Especially like, we know that ancestrally it had feathers. We know at least Coelurosaurs had feathers ancestrally, which includes ornithomimids. And so that would include animals like Therizinosaurus, Deinocheirus, and potentially Tyrannosaurus as well, that ancestrally had feathers and could have still had feathers. We just really don't know. But yeah, I think that's cool to have a scalar's interpretation. I would love to see this guy put on the Therizinosaurus and then have the full-on feathers, because I just love feathers, and I really hope feathers are figured out so we can give so many other dinosaurs feathers and create much more cool mods and give animals that should have feathers, like most of the pterosaurs that should have pecnofibers, and then give like some of the dinosaurs that should or could have feathers, which would be quite cool. But that's kind of a little wish list from me. But anyway, really big fan of this Deinocheirus. Master Dude has done quite a wonderful job, so we'll let him walk off and do his thing. I'm not sure what this guy's actually based on, but I think he might be based on the Therizinosaurus. But yeah, I think he's quite cool. Big fan. But anyway, I think this is a great place to end the video, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit that little bell icon to get notified below anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.